And joining us now is Robert Pszczel, Senior Fellow at the Center for Eastern Studies. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
So the coordination of supplies, how important is it and what is the driving force behind this decision? Is it simply about securing against the possible Trump presidency, which might actually bring about a reshuffle when it comes to NATO's role in supporting Ukraine?
No, I think what you mentioned, of course, may be in the back of mind of a number of people in terms of kind of trying to predict to some extent the political developments. But there are much kind of long-term and much more structural issues which have, if you like, driven the allies to come to the conclusion that they're pretty close, I think, judging by what we've heard in even the last days, to agreement, to kind of set the support to Ukraine, which is fundamental from NATO. I mean, 99, the words of Secretary General, and I do, of military supplies to Ukraine come from NATO allies. So to set this support in more, if you like, long term, in more, comprehensive terms, and that means that whether we don't know what the language will be, but discussion is like we hear the words framework, we hear the word mission, but it is essential that it's not just the military supplies, but the whole assistance package, including training, is coordinated by NATO. Of course, that does not mean that those structures, those countries or institutions which played a leading role will kind of disappear from the scene. I think the US will continue to provide a kind of political umbrella to the so-called Ramstein group. But right now, the implementation of those decisions, making sure that they're the right packages, these are important things which matter on a battlefield, is done by US command. Whereas the plan is that will be taken over by NATO. The same goes for EU's role, for example, in coordinating or managing some of the training. So nothing which has been working, which has worked so far, will disappear. That's the idea. But there needs to be more kind of order in this. And the last but not least issue is, of course, the issue of financing, and that's where I think at the moment, the more complicated discussions are taking place, because whenever you talk about money, and this is about big money, and then of course countries pay great attention. So we'll see what emerges. Maybe we'll hear more as the meeting of the defense ministers progresses today and tomorrow.
You mentioned now the finance issue here, and I would love to deepen on that. What are the challenges that NATO might have now by taking over the coordination of arms supplies to Ukraine?
Well, the challenge is the war itself, of course, So the key thing is that there is a broad agreement that Ukraine essentially needs to win, or at least, I think that's certainly the view of the countries in the region bordering Ukraine. But a lot has changed, and NATO has put itself kind of, very firmly in the scene. So it's an issue of our kind of NATO's reputation as well. But the bottom line is we cannot allow Russia to win, and help has to be provided to Ukraine. The challenges are, of course, that you need for this kind of political unity. And that goes for NATO, but it goes to other settings. For example, recent decision by G7, I think it's there, one reads the news reports, on using some of the frozen Russian assets to kind of have a financing a loan to again help Ukraine. That matters as well. So do the other things. So the challenges NATO facing politically are kind of similar. Of course, time matters as well. We need to move quickly. And then, of course, when I mention political unity, we need to have as many, in NATO's case, we need to have everybody's on board to make decisions. So yes, the visit of the Secretary General to Hungary has kind of, it seems, unblocked that problem, because Hungary seems to be not really in solidarity with other allies, but at least it's not going to block the decision. So it's a kind of, it's a bitter victory in this saga.
So in the current configuration, it was possible to overcome Hungary's opposition by allowing it to essentially stay on the margins, right? Not to participate in the ongoing efforts. But we've also seen European elections quite recently, and the results, while not changing Europe's landscape fundamentally as yet, they show a rise of the far right in certain countries. Now there is snap elections coming up in France. Do you think that changes in the political scene in important members of NATO, such as France or Germany, could prove more difficult? Because it's hard to imagine having France opting out and just, staying on the margins. They will want to have an influence. What is this influence going to be? And also coming back to the possible Trump presidency, how could this reshape the way decisions are made?
Well, I think, NATO as an organization, its leaders, in every country and in NATO HQ will have to come to terms, whatever political changes may bring. That's kind of, that happens, there are elections almost every month in now 32 NATO countries. But you're right. I mean, that's quite a lot of political challenges. And there is no point in denying that for instance, in the elections, the European Parliament, recent ones, we have seen a growth in support to a number of parties which openly say that they would prefer not to support Ukraine, because they think that's a kind of, I think they're driven, of course, by interest, perhaps some sympathies towards Moscow, but it's this sort of false argument about trying to avoid a war. So that is a major worry, of course. But coming back to the Hungarian example, you used the word opting out, you're right. And that's also something which, worries a lot of people. I'm thinking of this as a kind of, copying some of the solutions from the European Union decision making. But there, because we had a number of countries, securing some kind of opt-outs from different parts of the policies. But this had to do with, even sometimes constitutional issues, for example, on the matters of security and foreign policy. Here, we're talking about a country which is basically saying, yeah, we kind of, we will allow you to proceed, but we will have nothing to do with this. Now, bearing in mind how Hungary has been behaving, and this could be the model, unfortunately, for other countries. That's why I'm mentioning this as well. If they generate governments who kind of try to behave the same way, that would be a recipe for really undermining solidarity in the more structural way. So, but there's a lot to worry about. There's also a lot of things to do, and that's I think what the ministers, for instance, who are gathering today in Brussels and tomorrow, ministers of defense of NATO, will be focusing on, because it's Ukraine, it's collective defense, it's looking at the new NATO's nuclear, for example, posture, which is quite important. And yes, they will hopefully discuss, the budgets, their own defense budgets, because there is still quite a bit of things to do, to do in order to meet those targets that the allies have set themselves.
And like you mentioned, the statements coming from Hungary are quite alarming, which shows that there is, in effect, a lack of unity in some at least elements now between the NATO member states. And my question is, how do you think that NATO plans to strengthen its defense mechanism, but also unity, so that now we would not be speaking about a lack of NATO in, let's say, 20 years?
No, I mean, I don't think one should sort of go in that direction. I mean, you can of course paint any kind of scenario, multiple futures, I think it's called in the jargon. But let's again concentrate what we have today. It is true though that there is a certain problem, and it's been there for quite some time, with one may call it kind of internal discipline. NATO is not a Warsaw Pact. These are democratic countries, and they take decisions. They quarrel, if you like. They never come to the table with everything agreed. But having said this, there has to be an element of kind of, as I mentioned, solidarity. And in political terms, for many years, the US has played a role of a kind of, as the saying goes, herding the cats, in order to come to the decisions which then benefit everybody, because everybody always starts with having individual interests and so on. And the problem is that we have not seen that much of this recently. Now, Secretary General plays a great role. He's a consummate diplomat, but there are limits to as far as he can go, because in the end, countries need sometimes stronger inducements. And that's, that's where I would hope that there would be a bit of a change. After all, it's a summit in Washington. It's an anniversary summit. So, yes, I mean, I'm worried, like you, about this challenges to, if you like, internal solidarity. But having said this, NATO has survived perhaps even bigger crises in the past, and that's part and parcel of having an alliance where countries change governments, and sometimes the governments that come into play, or they are there, they're not to everybody's liking. That's life.
As the old adage goes, where there is will, there is a way. It's just about ensuring there is political will to make sure the alliance continues along its path. Robert Pszczel was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.